This year, I got to try every single iPad in Apple's lineup for 2023, and there are 6 of them, and out of the 6, I've kept 3 of them, and the other 3 I didn't end up keeping. So what I want to do is go over all 6 iPads, go over the 3 of the iPads that I didn't keep, and go over the 3 that I have kept, and then give my impressions about which one I think is the best for me, and which one I would recommend for the typical consumer. Because I think that what I value in a tablet is not probably something that everyone else values, like the average iPad user is really gonna care about. And so I just wanna provide that perspective for everyone who's watching. The 3 iPads that I didn't keep are the iPad 9th generation, the iPad 10th generation, and the iPad Air 5th generation. So the iPad 9th generation is the old form factor with the home button and the big bezels on the sides, and that's gonna go for $329. The iPad 10th generation is the redesign that looks more like the iPad Air and the iPad Pros, and that it has a bunch of different colors that come with it. It has USB-C, and that is gonna start at $449. And then finally, we have the iPad Air, which also comes in a wonderful variety of colors, and that one is gonna start at $599. So there's obviously a huge price range from the iPad 9th generation to the iPad Air. And if you're thinking about getting an iPad, I don't recommend the 9th generation iPad to a lot of people. And that's mainly because it has the really old form factor with the home button, and most people who are probably trying to get a new iPad today won't want to have such a dated looking device. It also has an older chip in terms of the A13 chip, and so if you want to future-proof yourself, you probably don't want to go down that route unless you really have a strict budget. And so if you really don't want to go over $329, then go ahead and get the iPad 9th generation, but for most people, you're probably not going to be looking at this iPad. Now the iPad 10th generation is a complete redesign with USB-C, but it also came with a price jump to $449. Now with that price jump, like I mentioned, you do get the redesign, you get new colors, you get Touch ID in the home button, you get the USB-C, I think I've mentioned that twice now. You get a slightly larger display at 10.9 inches, an updated chip with the A14 chip, and so it has a lot of nice features going for it, and it's a really good device. For $449, I think it's a little bit overpriced for a lot of people, and I don't really recommend this tablet for one reason, and that's because that it still uses the 1st generation Apple Pencil. So the 1st generation Apple Pencil is not a bad stylus by any means, but the problem is that since it has USB-C on this new iPad and the 1st gen Apple Pencil charges via Lightning, you need an adapter in order to charge it into the iPad, and it's a really clunky sort of charging experience that is not really fun or intuitive, and it's just not a really great experience. And so unfortunately for that reason, I don't recommend the 10th generation iPad to a lot of people unless again you really need to stay below $500 for your budget. So that leaves us with the iPad Air, and to be honest, this iPad is not my favorite iPad in the lineup right now, but I think it's going to check the most boxes for most people. It has a 10.9 inch display like the 10th gen iPad. It has a wonderful variety of colors that you can choose from as well. It also has Touch ID in the power button, and it has the M1 chip, so it's really future-proofing you in terms of hardware. This iPad also uses a 2nd gen Apple Pencil instead of the 1st gen Apple Pencil, which means the connectivity and charging experience is a lot more intuitive. All you have to do is basically magnetically connect it to the side of your device and it'll charge and connect that way. Now at $599, that is a pretty steep price for a tablet. And the reason why I don't like this device that much is because you're paying a lot for a lot of compromise. And I think that if you're willing to kind of save up just a little bit more, you could get a much more useful device that has a way better user experience than you'd get with the iPad Air. Now, with that being said, I don't think a lot of people will notice that difference. Since I'm a tech enthusiast, this is some things that I look out for and they really make a huge difference to me, but most people won't really care. And what is something that they may not care about? Well, that would be the 120 Hz display you might get in the iPad Pros. That refresh rate is something that I'm just so used to and accustomed to in my iPad devices that I have a really hard time, it sounds silly, but I have a really hard time going to devices that don't have that refresh rate and using the Apple Pencil on them, or just using them, scrolling around on them and using them regularly as iPads. It's just not the kind of experience that I want for my tablet, and so that's why I did not keep the iPad Air. I really do love the colors and the hardware on the iPad Air, but the display is really the factor that kept me back. And it's kind of funny because I actually prefer having Touch ID in the power button on my iPads than Face ID, which the iPad Pros have, but it's just the display on the iPad Air is really not up to standard for something that I want to use. Just to give some perspective, the 11-inch iPad Pro has a 2388 by 1668 resolution at 264 ppi, pixels per inch, whereas the iPad Air has a 2360 by 1640 resolution, also at 264 ppi, but the difference is very noticeable to me in terms of the resolution on the displays. On top of that, the iPad Air doesn't get as bright as the iPad Pro, which is something that I also notice a lot and is a huge drawback for me. The iPad Air gets 500 nits of brightness, whereas the iPad Pro gets 600 nits of brightness. And so the lack of Probe Motion display, the worse resolution, and the dimmer screen are all contributors to why I can't use the iPad Air as one of my tablets that I keep, and that's why I don't have it any longer. Okay, so with those three out of the way, let's move on to other three iPads that are in Apple's lineup and the ones that I've actually kept. So first up is the iPad Mini here. This starts at $499. It has an 8.3 inch display, and it's a really phenomenal tablet. Now, display quality wise, it's pretty poor, along the same lines of what you get with the iPad Air in terms of brightness and resolution. It only has 500 nits of brightness, and the resolution is 2266 by 1488, which is considerably worse than what you get in the iPad Pros. So this is something that's really noticeable to me as well when I'm using this device, and it's probably the biggest drawback of the iPad Mini. The form factor is amazing, the portability, just the iPad going back to its roots of not having all these bells and whistles and just being a basic iPad, I think is really great to have. And so I really love this device for those reasons, but it's not something that I recommend to most people unless you really just need this form factor, mainly because the price point is too high and the display quality is so poor compared to what else is out there. There are other iPads that I don't think a lot of people will get a lot of utility out of this one. Next up, we have my favorite iPad, which is the iPad Pro 11-inch. Now this is quite an expensive iPad. It is starting at $799. And that is a steep price to pay for a tablet, but you can always get these used or refurbished and get older generations of the iPad Pros, and that's generally what I recommend to most people. Is if you want to get an iPad and you don't want to pay $800 for this 11-inch iPad Pro, go ahead and get one of the older models that are still really fantastic. You can even go back, this one has an M2 chip, you can get the one with an M1 chip for quite a significant discount, and you don't even need the M1 chip in your iPad, to be honest. Now the reason why I love this is kind of what I already mentioned before. The display is incredible. The ProMotion, the resolution, the brightness, fantastic experience for productivity and watching content, and it's a device that you really want to go back to and use. The other thing is that it has the ability to pair with the Magic Keyboard, which is something that the iPad Air can also do. But like I said, I prefer the iPad Pros because of their displays, and having the Magic Keyboard as a potential accessory to use is a lot of fun to use. It doesn't offer a lot of utility, at least for me, but I know it can be really useful for a lot of people from a productive standpoint. So if you need a good keyboard experience, you can really get that with the iPad Pros. Other than that, most of the other specs on here are overkill and way beyond the scope of anything I need in terms of the camera system that it has in here. It has an 8-core CPU and a 10-core GPU and a 16-core neural engine, like all those things that don't really make a huge difference in my iPad experience. It's fast, it's quick, it does everything I need it to do for school, for content consumption, and just whatever you need to do to use a tablet. I think the 11-inch form factor is perfect. It's the same size in terms of the footprint as you get in the iPad Air and the 10th gen iPad, but the screen is bigger, there's less bezels, and so this 11-inch crisp display is just so much fun to use, and it is amazing. If you get with the M2 chip, you get the hover feature with the Apple Pencil, which I think could be useful for a lot of people. It doesn't offer that much more utility to me, but it's still something that's great to have. And with an M2 chip in this device, you're going to be future-proof for a pretty long time. That leaves us with the final device, which I have down here and which I've been referencing for my notes, which is the iPad Pro 12.9 inch. Now this is a big boy, and currently it starts at $1099. This is not actually the latest version of the iPad Pro that I'm holding in my hands, the 12.9 inch one. This is the 2020 version, so it has the A12Z chip, I believe. It doesn't even have the M2 chip, and it's still a phenomenal machine. Now at the time when I got this, I was doing a lot more note taking, and I really appreciated the huge canvas that this offers and all that real estate for taking notes. These days, I don't need that much space on my iPad for note taking. I think the 11 inch does that just fine. So if I had to go back and redo my entire iPad purchase, I probably would not have kept the 12.9 inch or bought it in the first place. I probably just would have gone straight to the 11 inch iPad Pro. But since I have it, I haven't decided to sell it because I really do enjoy using this larger screen sometimes. But for most people, I don't think they need a 12.9 inch tablet at all. I think an 11 inch is perfectly fine, unless you really want to do a lot of video editing on your iPad, or music editing, or drawing, or anything like that, in which case this could be useful. But again, I think most people can get by with an 11 inch display. And again, at $1099, that is a really steep price point for a tablet. So I think most people aren't really looking to spend that much money on something like that. And so maybe going with a laptop will probably just be a much safer bet for most people. So where does the iPad lineup lie in terms of what I recommend? Well, again, I will always recommend, I think, the iPad Pro 11 inch for most people. And if you look back at all my videos, this is the tablet that I've been recommending for years to people, even when I didn't own it myself. And I think it just checks the most boxes for most people. You get the most bang for your buck with this device. Again, you don't have to get the most current version of this iPad Pro 11 inch if you don't want to, but I really do recommend getting an iPad Pro as your iPad, because that display is just miles and miles better than what you notice on an iPad Air. Now, again, with that being said, a lot of my friends and family members who aren't that enthusiastic about tech as I am have a hard time noticing a difference between the iPad Air and the 11 inch iPad Pro, which completely boggles my mind. But you know, a lot of people don't really care or pay attention to, or really want to look at all those subtleties between different devices, which is completely fair. In that case, then I do recommend the iPad Air. I think all the different colors are so much fun, and if it makes you excited about the product, then that's the one you should go for. And I really loved all the colors on the iPad Air. I wish I could have kept it just because I loved the way it looked, and that's what made me excited to use it. But once I actually sat down and started using it, it was just such a poor experience for me compared to what I was used to that I just couldn't justify keeping it anymore. So those are my thoughts on the current iPad lineup. I love tablets and iPads. I've been doing this for 6 years, looking at the iPad lineup ever since they first announced the 10.5 inch iPad Pro. And it's just been so much fun looking at the progress the iPad has taken, and kind of been thrown for a little bit of a loop in terms of what I thought the iPad Pro lineup was going to look like versus what it looks like now. But regardless, I always have fun looking at these tablets, playing around with them, and seeing who can use which tablet for what sort of use case. And so if you have any more thoughts or questions about which tablet you think it would be best for you, feel free to let me know. But that's going to be about it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.